In January 2024, Russian rockets hit Ukraine's two biggest towns, Kiev and Kharkiv. At least 130 people were hurt, and 5 were killed. What made this attack unique, though, wasn't the death toll, but the weapon used. Russia used missiles from North Korea, drones from Iran, and technology from China. This was the first time that foreign forces were coordinated in this way. Since then, war has changed a lot. Russia now makes about 330 drones a month on its own, and it is working with Iran to open a new drone factory in Russia, which will increase production even more. At the same time, North Korea is sending Russia rounds of artillery shells. More than 2.5 million have been sent so far, just as Ukraine's stockpile runs out. China, for its part, has emerged as Russia's most significant economic lifeline. The Chinese have ramped up their imports of Russian oil and gas, injecting billions upon billions into the Russian economy. At the same time, China supplies Russia with a wide range of military technology, from semiconductors and electronic devices to radar and jet fighter components. It is precisely because of this combined support from China, Iran, and North Korea that Moscow has been able to circumvent Western trade sanctions and thwart attempts to isolate it on the global stage. Yet this quadrilateral support has laid out merely scratches the surface. Since 2022, military, economic, political and technological ties between all four nations have deepened. Their shared objective is to establish an alternative to the existing Pax Americana, and even though all four powers have widely different values and beliefs, by joining hands their collective power projection far exceeds the sum of their individual efforts. Together, they might just rewrite the rules of the game. Recently, Ukrainian officials published a video showing North Korean recruits in Russia getting ready to join the war. Some 11,000 North Korean soldiers are estimated to join the Russian side. That's quite a story, and some question the legitimacy of it, but its metadata is just as informative. Dozens of articles were published, but this received a surprisingly muted response from Europe, making it a potential blind spot. This information comes from local news. Seeing all sides of a conflict is important for making good decisions, which is why I asked him to sponsor this video. Recently, Putin hosted leaders from the Global South at the 16th BRICS Summit. The goal of the summit is to strengthen multilateralism. Hundreds of headlines were written about it around the world, and it's interesting that most of them came from Russia. Understanding these and other events like them helps us make sense of the modern world. To save 40% off the Vantage plan, which is the one I use, subscribe through my link Ground News, Caspian, or scan the QR code on the screen. Your subscription helps us do our work and makes this channel possible, so I suggest you check it out. Below today, Russia is shaking up global politics. It is publicly attacking the American global order, which it has been looking down its nose at for decades. After Ukraine took over Crimea, things between Iran and North Korea sped up from 2013 to 2021. From 2018 to 2022, China's share of Russian trade went from 10% to 20% at the same time. Russia gave China 83% of all the arms it bought. This transfer of technology was a game changer. It helped China improve its air defense and air force while also making its submarine and naval powers better at about the same time. Russia renewed its ties with Iran and helped keep Syrian President al-Assad in office after the start of the Syrian civil war in 2011. They did this through Iran Lifeline, which protected Iran from the effects of US sanctions. But while Russia is the driving force behind the new anti-American order, it is not the only one holding things together. China is buying a lot of oil from Iran and investing billions of dollars in its economy. The advanced rocket technology that Iran gets from North Korea is the same technology that Iran gives to its allies. With China, North Korea has close political and economic ties. With Russia, North Korea has close military and international ties. But the Ukrainian war changed everything and sped things up. The four countries have stronger diplomatic, military, and economic links than they did when they were cut off from Western trade in the past. Russia is now depending on China, Iran and North Korea for strategic goods like missiles, drones, and microchips. In exchange, these countries get to talk to their Russian peers about making deals that help their own economies and armies. Russia is now one of Iran's biggest arms dealers and one of its biggest sources of foreign investment. Moscow has stood up for Iran and its allies at the UN Security Council. This backing has been very helpful, and it is because of it that Iran felt safe enough to use its allies in and around the Middle East at the same time. China now gets more of its oil from Russia than from any other country. Last year, trade between the two countries hit a record high of over $240 billion. Russia has also given the Chinese advanced weapons, and their joint military exercises have grown in size and frequency. The Russians still have an advantage over the Chinese when it comes to military equipment like submarine technology, remote sensing satellites, and aircraft engines. If more technology transfers happen, it would hurt American advantages in East Asia and other places. In addition, as a sign of thanks, Russia has unfrozen millions of dollars in North Korean assets that had been frozen in Russian banks because of UN sanctions. North Korea has given Russia ammunition and other types of military support. Relations between Moscow and Pyongyang are getting closer all the time. The North Koreans are now negotiating for advanced technology transfers that would make their intercontinental ballistic missiles more accurate and increase their range. This would definitely threaten American security in East Asia. Italia-China. As if Iran and North Korea weren't already riding high on the wave, they've held joint naval training in the Gulf of Oman for 3 years in a row and are now planning to do so elsewhere. By working together, the four countries can increase their power beyond what each of them could do alone. Anti-American feelings are what brings them together and drives the growth of their so-called alternative order. Each power claims its own area of influence. For example, China casts a net over Taiwan and the South China Sea. Iran has people working for it in Syria. Lebanon, Yemen, and Iraq. North Korea says it owns the whole Korean peninsula, and Russia wants to take over. America is the main thing that keeps the Soviet Union from expanding its spheres of influence in all four battle spaces. In response, all four countries want to weaken American power projection, so the United States has become partners in crime. When the Cold War ended, the US filled the power void to become the world's most powerful superpower, and for decades, threats to the US-led order were limited to a few rogue states that didn't have much power to overturn it. But now things are a little different. Russia and China, Iran and North Korea have made Western tools of statecraft less useful. The alternative order is working hard to become less dependent on the US dollar. In 2021, only 3% of Russia's imports were paid for in Chinese yuan. By December 2022, that number had risen to 20%. Iran and Russia decided to use their own currencies for trade with each other. These are probably the first of many steps that will be taken to get around Western bans and even weaken American power. In the information world, too, people are working together to get the dollar. China, Iran and North Korea didn't condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Instead, they put the blame on NATO. Similarly, none of the members of the alternative order condemned the Hamas attack on October 7th. This kind of informational warfare isn't coordinated at the state level, but the messages naturally overlap to make America look like a bully and an unstable force, and it works especially well in the global south. The alternative order can pursue these goals because of the way the world is set up. Shared borders and laurel zones allow for transportation corridors that we can't stop. Iran now sends its drones to Russia through the Caspian Sea, which is a sea area that is even safer from the US Navy. Iran and Russia have agreed to build a rail corridor that will be similar to the Suez Canal. The corridor will run from Moscow to Baku and then to Tan. At the same time, China and Russia are working to create new energy and transportation systems that only go through their own countries. This will allow Russia to avoid sanctions on oil exports by sending supplies to China through pipelines. On the other hand, China has unrestricted access to Russia's military-industrial complex, which could be useful if there is a military conflict between Beijing and Washington. All in all, the members of the alternative order have direct routes to each other's territories, though some of the land in between is hard to get to and costs a lot to build. In theory, Pyongyang can get to Tan by crossing through China, Russia, and the Caspian Sea. This geographical fact gives the alternative order an advantage, but it also means that if the United States and the alternative order went to war, the Americans would be up against Russia's combined resources and abilities. China, even though there is a lot of talk about how great things are between Iran and North Korea, no power would want to test that theory. On the other hand, most of their cooperation has been based on bilateral interests so far. As this turns into trilateral and quadrilateral policy, their shared ability to project power is likely to grow disproportionately. Italia, China, Iran and North Korea are both working to destroy the United States, but this wasn't always the case. In fact, historically, these four countries have been at odds with each other longer than they have with the US. In 1941, the Soviet Union invaded Iran and tried to use local separatists to make puppet states. Russia also had a border dispute with China that wasn't resolved until 2004. In the past, both China and Russia supported Western efforts to stop Iran's nuclear programs and keep North Korea from communicating with the rest of the world. Even now, all four countries have serious concerns about each other. For example, China buys Russian oil at a huge discount because sanctions have made it almost impossible for other countries in Central Asia to demand a fair price. The rivalry between Russia and China is clear. Both are trying to gain power in places like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. In Pakistan and Afghanistan, Chinese expansionism hurts Iran's interests and takes away its influence. The Russian-Iranian alliance isn't what it's cracked up to be. The two don't agree in the South Caucasus or the wider Middle East. Also, despite all the talk about how well they work together on military technology, things like combat drones, missiles, and satellites are just bargaining chips in bilateral talks. There are no freebies. If one country's interests are violated, the praised military technological bargaining chips are taken away, kind of like a stick and a carrot policy. These concerns aren't likely to be resolved anytime soon. Mutual hostility toward the United States has grown even stronger, and that feeling has a lot of weight around the world. Imagine how many countries have governments that share this view. Beslan, Turkey, Lebanon, Eritrea, Sudan, Venezuela, Guam, Nicaragua, and many other countries in the global south are joining the alternative order to make fun of the Americans. These powers don't need a clear plan to overturn America's global order, they just want to do it. Italia, China. It's possible for Iran and North Korea to pursue their own interests at set times and places. For example, they could use provocations at the same time to spread out American resources and capacity. America, no matter how strong it is, can't be everywhere at once. For example, if large-scale fighting broke out between Israel and Taiwan on top of the conflict in Ukraine, the Americans would have to make sacrifices and leave some areas. This may seem irrational, but that's how geopolitics works. When these countries get together, they might be able to throw the world off balance. Thanks for seeing the video.